Okay, is everybody ready?
Ready.
Okay. Thank you all for coming this morning. My name is Richard Burke. I'm the Executive Director of the Libertarian Party of Oregon. And we're here today to launch our campaign against what will become Ballot Measure 30. Last summer, as many of you know, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives teamed up with a Democratic governor to pass one of the largest tax increases in Oregon history. They did it during a recession, which we are still in, thereby taking money from working families at a time when they need that money most. They did it during a time of high unemployment, even though tax increases are known to drive jobs and investment out of the state. They did it despite the fact that there are known sources of savings, as have been proposed in a variety of alternative budgets, some of which have come from the Libertarian Party, which could be tapped without hurting children, the elderly, or other vulnerable people. They raised taxes even though most of them know it was wrong. Republicans and Democrats alike said way back in April that taxes do not equate to leadership and that government must live within its means. And finally, they did it even though voters said that they did not want higher taxes after voting against them in a statewide election back in January with Measure 28, another Republican-sponsored tax hike. What we have experienced is nothing short than a meltdown of leadership in our state government. And the real objective of our campaign is to try and provide that leadership. Since the taxes passed, the Libertarian Party has joined with Citizens for a Sound Economy and other organizations in an effort to refer the tax increase to voters through a citizen petition. I'd like to begin by giving credit to Citizens for a Sound Economy. They've done the heavy lifting in the short time frame that we have had to gather 50,420 signatures. Russ Walker, who is the Oregon chair of CSE, has done an excellent job in what will be a successful petition effort. I am very proud to say that of the groups that have not been funded and have been working on their own resources, the Libertarian Party, within the 45-day window, has itself gathered about 3,000 signatures, which, at the time of our last internal spreadsheet, is 30% more than the Oregon Republican Party and the Young Republicans combined. Now, we are confident that our movement will exceed the 50,420 signatures required to force a February 3rd special election. This being the case, it is now time to move to the next phase of our campaign, which we wanted to do before the holiday season, that being to defeat what will become Ballot Measure 30. At this point, I will ask Tom Cox to come forward to provide some policy perspectives. Then I will return to outline our campaign, play some ads for you, and talk about some of our specific objectives. Tom.
Thank you, Richard. My friends, it's been said that the Oregon legislature will always do the right thing after it's tried everything else. Well, we fiscal conservatives want the legislature to do the right thing. We want it to cut wasteful and unnecessary state spending, and we're almost there. We citizens just have to block the few remaining exits and give the big tax interests no alternative. Now, the way to do that is to stop what will become Measure 30. The Libertarian Party remains the strongest and most consistent voice for fiscal conservatism in the state of Oregon today. In boxing terms, we punch above our weight. The Oregon GOP is 53 times our size, but did they gather 53 times as many signatures as we did? Did they gather 20 times as many? Twice? No, we gathered more signatures than they did. In the last election cycle, how many fiscal conservatives did they put on the ballot to give voters a choice? Well, you can look at their voting record and find out that despite having a 10-vote majority in the House, the Oregon GOP crumbled when push came to shove, and 11 of their members abandoned the principles of fiscal conservatism to vote for the largest tax increase in Oregon history. Now, it's a little early to talk about what impact libertarians will have on the Oregon GOP when it's time for the November elections, but it's not too early to talk about what we can do immediately as soon as Measure 30 fails and the Oregon legislature comes into special session to change the way the cuts will be distributed. What is it that the legislature can do? We start off with 5 things. First, sell SAFE, S-A-I-F, the State Accident Insurance Fund. That would raise something like $2 billion. And that will tide us over until other cuts are made. That sale could be bonded against providing immediate cash. Selling SAFE would also end the disastrous experiment of having the government unfairly competing with private businesses using public dollars. Number 2, start auditing state agencies. Today, 11 of the 13 largest state agencies have, and I quote, no internal audit function, unquote, to protect nearly $12 billion of precious taxpayer money from loss due to fraud, waste, and abuse. That, according to the Secretary of State's own Department of Audits. Give you an example. The Oregon Health Plan admits that it wastes over $100 million providing medical benefits to people that it knows aren't eligible. Overall, at last report, only 3 out of 27 agencies that were checked could even meet the state's own guidelines for good auditing practice. A simple return to honest and responsible stewardship of the public trust would save millions. And it would begin to restore the faith in government that many citizens have lost. Number 3, zero-based budgeting. It's been recommended for years. It'll save us significant money, and the time to start is now. Not in 2005, not in 2007, now. Number 4, purchase outcomes, don't fund activity. That's the approach taken by the most efficient governments around the world. It forces agencies to be accountable for results while leaving them maximum flexibility for finding effective and innovative ways to achieve their results. And number 5, implement the Cruz-Doyle Plan. That's the fiscally conservative budget plan unveiled in the fall of 2002 by State House members Jeff Cruz and Dan Doyle. That will save $500 million, and those savings will roll into future biennia. This gives you an idea of the kinds of things that the Libertarian Party is planning to bring to the voters. Now for some details on how exactly we're going to carry that story forward, the tactics and strategies we're going to use to reach the voters. I want to have Richard Burke come up and talk about our campaign plan.
You know, it seems so often that when we talk about saving taxpayer money, that people mistake this as being mean or cold-hearted, not compassionate. And we're often stereotyped or locked into the stereotype of being the angry white males who don't like to pay for public services. But one thing I know is that if you have a car that's getting 2 miles to the gallon, you can do 2 things. You can tune up the engine and get 10 miles to the gallon, or you can just keep putting more gas in. That's the state of our state today. And I argue that if we care about children, the elderly, vulnerable people, the best way we can serve them is to make the state more efficient, to get more out of every dollar. The things that Tom has just told you illustrate some of the ways in which we're not getting the most out of every dollar. Because we have to help vulnerable people, but we cannot do it while at the same time destroying jobs and destroying opportunity. Where's the compassion in that? So this is not just a campaign about saving money. This is about a campaign of compassion for the future of this state, for the futures of the children who are growing up and are currently in the schools in this state. We cannot afford to be as inefficient as we have been. And to that end, we are taking this campaign throughout the state. Those of you who have followed our campaigns before know that we travel around the state doing a variety of media appearances. We're going to do that again, only we're going to do it more extensively than we ever have before. Even small towns like Silverton will be visited by people who have gained experience and have been trained as spokespeople, particularly during the Measure 29 campaign. We're going to hold town hall meetings, which is something we have not done a lot of before, using our 17 affiliated county parties, so we'll have local action in every region of the state. We will be providing full policy options. Tom has given you a top 5 list of immediate savings, but we will, in the weeks ahead, provide a detailed line-by-line budget, just as we have during Tom Cox's gubernatorial race, Mitch Schultz's state treasurer race, and my gubernatorial race back in 1998. But this time, we're going to rely more on paid media. We have 2 ads in the can. I'm going to play them for you now. We have a limited number of CDs in case any of you want to use them for your own purposes. These are initial cuts. There are mistakes on them, but it'll give you an idea of what we're trying to say.
Some people think that higher taxes equals caring. Supporters of Measure 30 say we must raise taxes to show we care about our children, the elderly, and other vulnerable people. They mean well, but continuously taking money away from working families simply hurts us. If we really care about people, we need to vote no on Measure 30. We won't get stable funding for schools and public services by forcing businesses and their jobs out of Oregon. Measure 30 will make these problems worse. That's not compassion. Instead of fighting each other over tax dollars, we can generate more revenue by making Oregon a better place to create jobs. More jobs means more tax revenue. Higher taxes and caring are not the same. Have faith in our ability to build a future. Make the compassionate choice. Vote no on Measure 30.
Don't give the addicts their next fix. Just say no to Measure 30. Paid for by the Libertarian Party of Oregon.
Music's too loud, and we had the wrong tagline at the end, but you get the idea of where we're going with that. And the central message here is that higher taxes does not equal caring. We're being told that if you don't support higher taxes, you don't care about people. And that's just not true, and that's one of the chief messages we're going to bring to this campaign. Here is the other, Teresa DeBellis right over there. She was the voice talent on that. Thank you for coming. Mitch Schultz, who ran for state treasurer, is the voice talent on the next spot.
Addiction. It's a terrible disease. Those who suffer from it will do anything to get their next fix. The state of Oregon has a spending addiction. For the last 10 years, the state of Oregon has been on a spending binge. And now, the revenue drug is running short, and the addicts have decided that you, the taxpayer, must give them their next fix. We told them no when we rejected Measure 28, but they keep ignoring us. It's time to send a clear message to the spending addicts in Salem. Which part of no did you not understand? The addicts must end their addiction to spending your money. It's time for a tax addict intervention. Measure 30 is our opportunity to help the addicts take their first step to recovery. There is no other choice. We must vote no on Measure 30.
Don't give the addicts their next fix. Just say no to Measure 30. Paid for by the Libertarian Party of Oregon.
I think the message there is pretty much self-evident. The text for both of these ads is in your press packet, along with some talking points that were put out by the Oregon or Voter Education Project.
Actually, it's a response to some of their talking.
That's right. It's a response to some of their talking points relating to the meaning of this campaign and the tactics being used. And that's the outlines of our campaign. And obviously we have the objective of defeating Measure 30, but we have a secondary objective too. And that is to hold the Republican Party accountable for what they have done. The Republican Party gave us Ballot Measure 28. Not only was it passed out of a Republican House and a Republican Senate, but was sponsored by Bill Witt, who was a Republican at the time. Ballot Measure 29, which we fought from a 70-30 split to a 45-55 split, authorizes new pension debt even after we pay off PERS, and really opens the door for a lot of borrowing if it's ever abused in the future. This measure, which will be Ballot Measure 30, was given to us by, again, a Republican House, championed by Lane Shetterly and Ben Westland. And this just can't go on. Now we've got Kevin Mannix jumping in front of a parade that other people have started, saying, we're going to save you, the Republicans, the fiscal conservatives. That's kind of like throwing you in the water than tossing you a life preserver saying that you've done somebody a favor. We're not going to let anybody provide political cover for those Republicans who betrayed the taxpayer. We want to encourage the Republican Party to find fiscally conservative primary challengers to take on those people who voted yes on this tax bill. They get first crack at them. We get second crack at them. Because the way they're recruiting candidates and the fact that the Republican Party and Kevin Mannix is not punishing those legislators who voted for a tax increase says that we're in for more of the same and more tax proposals if we keep doing what we're doing. So our campaign has ramifications far beyond the fate of Ballot Measure 30. It has to do with the composition and character of the Republican caucus and possibly who the majority parties are in the chambers of the legislature. So it's a lot to take on for a group our size, but we've taken on big bites before. And at this point, I'll be happy with Tom to entertain any of your questions.
Where are you getting the money to pay for this media?
I wish I knew. We're fundraising right now, and we're hoping that having the ads on our website will be a way to draw people in. People who want to hear this message on the radio will donate money to us for it. We do have a few big donors who have expressed interest in it, but we don't want to have to rely on them. We really want to cast a much wider net. We don't want to give away too much of our fundraising strategy quite yet. Let's wait till it's successful, and then we'll tell you how we did it.
So you don't have the money to get these on the air right now?
Not as much as we want.
We have several $1,000s now, but we're going to take a couple of pages from the Howard Dean School of Fundraising. We're going to be using our website extensively. People will be able to download these ads on the web. There'll be a PayPal button right next to them. If they like the ad, they'll be able to finance it. We have, like Tom Cox said, a number of major donors. Our state budget has gone up by a factor of 12 in the last several years. We are able to raise money. Fortunately, these ads, I believe, are provocative enough and controversial enough to ensure they're going to get circulated. The MP3s are going to be placed on various email lists. They're going to get around. They're going to get talked about. They're going to get heard. And that, of course, will generate hits on our website, which we think will sort of create a snowball effect, and we'll be able to buy more and more airtime. We've been able to generate a fair amount of press without ads. We think that this will simply accelerate what we're able to do.
Richard, you all were cooperating with the Republican Party to gather signatures on the petition effort, but now I hear you criticizing. Is the coalition that you had or the friendship that you had with them for this purpose, is that effectively over?
No, we're still collecting signatures, and for every signature the Republican Party gathers, I think they have our universal applause.
But you're also campaigning against that.
Well, we're campaigning against those Republicans who voted for taxes. They happen to be in office. There is a serious disconnect between the party rank and file and the elected officials.
But do you put Kevin Mannix in that category too?
Sure. Kevin Mannix supported a policy of borrowing during his gubernatorial campaign, which, although not directly a tax, ultimately becomes a tax when you pay that money back. He's flirted with the idea of the surcharge as being a possibly favorable way to go. He has not mobilized his organization to gather signatures in the way that we've mobilized ours, leaving the heavy lifting to other organizations like Citizens for Sound Economy and Taxpayer Association of Oregon. This is a parade started by Russ Walker and a variety of other organizations. And as Tom has said before, he's jumping in front of the parades and posing as one of the leaders. We're happy that he opposes this tax. And to the extent that he's fighting this particular tax, we will work with him as constructively as possible. But that doesn't mean that we're going to forget what happened last September and demand that there be some accountability and consequences for the taxpayers being betrayed.
Richard, are you worried that this kind of infighting potential here could ultimately defeat what it is you're trying to do at the election in February?
Well, no, I don't think so, because what we're going to do is rally the Republicans to get united behind this. They can either do one of two things. They can either divide amongst themselves, or they can get together and fight for this tax to prove that we're wrong. Go ahead.
Your point, though, that Mannix ought to be actively recruiting candidates to run against those 11.
Well,
yeah.
Here's the thing. We know that GOP party leadership has an obligation to defend its incumbents. But the GOP party leadership should not be out there giving the green light for 11 Republicans in the House to break ranks with the caucus and vote for a tax increase. And that's exactly what Kevin Mannix did. And then he sat on the sidelines for 2.5 months waiting to see if this was going to pass. And now that it's obviously going to pass, and then he jumps out and says, oh, yeah, I've been in favor of this all along. The Oregon GOP only voted to be in favor of this petition initiative a few weeks ago. We've been working on this for 2.5 months. So what we got here is a fair weather fiscal conservative.
Well, I mean, so should he work for the defeat of these 11 in the primary? Or?
I think that he is going to have to take a long, hard look in the mirror and decide whether he believes in anything other than his own power. Now, we've had a coalition of people who all have the same values. People who are true fiscal conservatives. And if the GOP nominates people who don't have those values, then it's not a split in a coalition to point that out and to say those people are not part of our movement. And we're not going to help them. We're going to try and stop them.
So, I mean, are you saying that I mean, this would be a significant change if you wanted party leaders to actively punish their own members for whatever vote they take in the legislature. I mean, do you want the Democratic and the Republican Party to have more power in the Oregon legislature?
What we want as libertarians is more freedom. We don't want taxpayers to be on the defensive. We don't care who's in power, whether it be us or the Republicans.
But you're criticizing Mannix for not punishing members of his own party.
That's right.
You're saying that you want the party leaders to have more influence in the Oregon legislature.
A party is based on a platform. A platform is based on principles. Now, Kevin Mannix has to decide if he's going to defend the retention of power for its own sake, or whether he's going to defend his principles and try to obtain power for his party on that basis. What has scared us and what made us decide to adopt this posture are two things. First, on a meeting of Town Hall on Channel 2, he was asked directly if there would be any consequences to those Republicans who voted for the tax. He said no. Now, as a party with a platform based on principles, if those principles are violated, you should find primary challengers of your party to go after them and finance them and help them to win. He didn't do that. The second thing is he's been repeatedly quoted in the newspaper as he's recruited candidates to run for various positions that he believes in a big tent, a large tent, and he is not looking for people of a particular ideology. He's looking for people who can win. Now, that's understandable if you're going for power for its own sake. But what this does is sow the seeds for a repetition of what we saw. Because if he recruits a bunch of fiscal moderates to run, or fiscal liberals to run on a Republican ticket, we're going to be exactly where we are again in the next cycle. And that is not what I understood the Republican Party to stand for. It's certainly not what the Libertarian Party stands for. And of course, many Republicans after the primary are forced to hold their nose so that a Democrat doesn't win, however frustrated they are. And that teaches them that they can get away with it. I think one of the useful constructive functions, even for Republicans, is for us to provide that added level of accountability.
So it's reasonable for one of the two major parties to take advice from a party that has never had anybody elected to the legislature?
I think
The ranks?
hang on. I think that good advice from any source should be welcome. Even a stopped clock is right twice a day. Maybe we're right this time. They would be fools to ignore it if it's true. And I think you'll find that if they cannot provide fiscally conservative alternatives for the voters, and we can, that they're going to suffer on Election Day for that failure on their part. And that's the best we can hope for, is to give voters more choices.
One of the main arguments against the tax increase that you and others have offered is that it's bad for the economy. Yet, I mean, you advocate selling SAFE, which was defeated. The Oregon legislature considered that in the last session, but it was defeated primarily by businesses that like the low rates, workers' compensation rates that SAFE is able to provide. Wouldn't that hurt the economy too?
What you're talking about there is corporate welfare. You're talking about businesses who are getting subsidized by taxpayer dollars and getting below market rates on their workers' comp insurance. We believe in making an environment that is friendly to business, not one that is essentially running a corporate welfare state.
But wouldn't that be bad for the economy, though, if
Quite the contrary.
If the state's all say.
No, you can't have a corporate welfare state that produces more wealth than a free market. It's simply not possible.
The plan that you guys came out with precedes now any plan that Mannix might release. There's going to be a group that will be staging a protest at his office today. I mean, do you guys feel like he's negligent in not coming out with a plan to balance the budget at this point, or does he have some sort of grace period for you?
Honestly, the time for Kevin Mannix to come up with a fiscally conservative budget for the state was 2002 when he ran for governor. And he didn't do it then, and he had multiple opportunities to do it. I reminded him of it in 5 different debates, that it would be appropriate for him to come up with a fiscally conservative budget for the state if he wanted to be governor. He declined that opportunity, and he suffered for it.
Is it fair to say that, well, Kevin, we welcome the few signatures you've been able to provide for this. Unless you change your act, get off the train here for Measure 30, we don't need your help.
I don't ever want to say that we don't need somebody's help. If someone comes in off the street and says, I want to volunteer and stuff envelopes, we need that help. And Kevin Mannix, he's not a person walking in off the street. He carries cachet among a lot of Republican Party members, and he can be a force to mobilize. I think he will be an inspirational force if he decides to hold his members accountable for voting yes on the tax and putting us in this defensive position in the first place. Here's what I'm hoping happens. One of the reasons we're coming out so hard against the Republican Party is because we want them to prove us wrong. We want them to say, they're crazy. We're going to do everything we can against this tax, and put them on the spot to make them come out with all of the money and all of the organization and all of the resources that they have just to prove us wrong. If they do that, if it's because of us, even in part, it will impact our effectiveness in this campaign. Go ahead.
I would like nothing better than for the Libertarian fiscally conservative position to be stolen wholesale by the Republicans, because then we'll have won. If our ideas are championed by other parties, by major parties, then we've won. And the extent to which they don't wish to be fiscal conservatives, it is vital for us to point that out to the voters and to make sure that they understand they have an alternative. And that alternative is the Libertarian Party.
You know, the premises of one of your ads is that, to oppose this tax is not to care, that, that in effect you do actually care. But, I mean, you also want to cut schools and social services, correct? I mean, mostly social services. The Libertarian is fine with cutting social services.
Hang on. No, absolutely, you are mistaken. Libertarians care very deeply about actually helping people. And those social programs that exist primarily to provide white-collar jobs for public employees and have, at best, a marginal effect on the people who actually need the help, that is a waste of money. That is not compassion. That is a jobs program. Now, the focus needs to be on actual outcomes for spending, not on baseline budgeting or making sure we have full employment in the division, but looking at the outcomes and making sure we can find the best way to spend those scarce dollars effectively.
I have an example I'd like to point out. One example of what we mean by that is we took a look at how much money we're spending on higher education in the state, and it comes to about $25,000 per student. And so Tom Cox's plan when he was running for governor was to provide a voucher for that amount of money that they can take anywhere. And that's what it costs to go to school at Stanford. Are we getting a Stanford quality education through Oregon's campuses? If the answer is no, then we're not spending the money well. We need to find a way to finance outcomes instead of process. This state is big on process, and the absence of a zero-based budgeting system is testimony to that. The fact that there is not auditing in state government is not testament to that. The fact that there is not a child's face attached to an auditing process results in a failure to attach an emotional reaction to the idea of instituting auditing. But it doesn't mean that it has any less impact on being able to feed a hungry child. Yeah. Thank you.